I adored No Good Read Goes Unpunished because this episode of The Simpsons is basically all about books. There are some other things in it that I liked as well, and I will, of course, give some specific examples, but with a spoiler warning if I think anything will be a spoiler. This is the 15th episode of the 29th season of The Simpsons. This is directed by Mark Kirkland, and I adored it. Marge is fed up of everybody watching cartoons, so she drags everybody out, and they all end up, well, almost all end up finding books that they want to read. And Bart's book is pretty good. For example, it gives him a way to stand up to Nelson, but it also gives him some other ideas as well that may not go according to plan, and I won't say any more than that. But I like the fact that it was shown that there is a book out there for everybody, and I truly believe that. Anybody who says they don't like reading, I just believe they haven't found the right kind of book yet. Lisa ends up reading this book that Marge loved as a little girl, but Marge reading it now as an adult realizes that there are a lot of things that are nowadays more offensive. And I mean, that always goes without saying. If you go back however many decades, there will always be at least something that was not offensive or not deemed to be offensive then that certainly is now. And there's a beautiful moment with Lisa that I loved, but I'll talk about it with a spoiler warning in a moment. But that led The Simpsons to give a voice for a couple of seconds to the show itself, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But I liked the commentary there that what was deemed suitable at one point wasn't now, and that you do need to be careful with children's literature, because some children's literature, classic literature, has some questionable characteristics, but generally I think publishing companies have a handle on what's still suitable to release as children's classics. But if you do happen to go to an antique bookstore or an antique book fair and you find a children's classic story, just be careful before you give it to a child, because you never know. But at the same time, I found that Marge wanting to heavily edit the book was not a good idea, because as Lisa points out, if you take out anything that's offensive or troubling or difficult, the characters haven't got any journey to go on. And that's really important. The number one rule of writing fiction, well, the number one rule is don't plagiarize. The number two rule is you need a good narrative. And if there's no conflict, then you don't really have the opportunity for resolution. And I think this was a really fun way of displaying that. So I really enjoyed all of the book aspects. There are a couple of specific moments, as I said, I'll talk about with a spoiler warning in a moment. Well, one's not really a spoiler, and it's probably going to be the thumbnail for this. Milhouse is reading a book that I have read. He's reading Bye Bye Boyfriend, which is, well, in The Simpsons, it's a Mary-Kate and Ashley book. But it's actually a Mary-Kate and Ashley two-of-a-kind book. And I've actually read it quite recently and adored it. I love Mary-Kate and Ashley. So it just amused me so much when Milhouse was reading it as well. Really thoroughly enjoyed that. Definitely an episode that spoke to me on so many levels. Absolutely loved it. We also have Daniel Radcliffe voicing himself very briefly. It's not the first time he's voiced in The Simpsons, but I think it might be the first time he's voiced himself. I could be wrong about that, but I know he's voiced some other characters. But it's always nice when Radcliffe is in The Simpsons. So the other moment, it's not really a spoiler for how the narrative develops, but it was a moment that I thought was so very well done. So I'll just say spoiler for now in case you want to discover it for yourself first. But this moment, as I said, spoilers for something that I think was very well done. It's very brief, but Lisa kind of addresses the camera, as it were, in a small speech about the fact that things that were once acceptable no longer are. And then she looks at a picture of a poo on her bedside table. And I think that was The Simpsons doing two things. One, they were saying, we acknowledge that this has become unacceptable. And it didn't occur to me that The Simpsons was the last speaking role a poo episode. So that was a little bit interesting, but I think it's also The Simpsons saying, hey, look, you can come after us for this, but it wasn't considered offensive at the time. As I've said, some things that were not deemed offensive by general society back in the day definitely are now, but that doesn't mean you should necessarily, well, I don't say you shouldn't punish people for what they did, as long as that person or people or society is aware of what they did and acknowledges it and rectifies the problem, as The Simpsons have done, then I think there's no point in going on about it and saying, yeah, well, you did this for yours, this wasn't right. Yeah, they've held their hands up to it. And I think that that's a big thing to do. So I think they're doing kind of two messages there with that. I think it was about 5, 6 seconds. It didn't last very long. But for me, I thought it was a really touching moment to give a nod to that character because, quite frankly, Apu is a brilliant character. But I can completely understand their decision to make him a non-verbal character now. So yeah, as I said, it was literally 5 or 6 seconds at the most, but I thought it was very well done, very well delivered, and brief, but very effective. So this is for me a brilliant episode. Absolutely loved pretty much every second of it. Will be very happy to watch it again. Easily one of my favourite episodes from season 29.